and we'll do that. So let's get things started by introducing Meredith and the Reverend Susan Ohlidal. Here's a space to share stories about the Spirit's work outside the walls of any church. Susan put on her clerical collar one evening, went to her local watering hole, brought herself a beer, and sat down at the bar. Soon, she was engaging in all sorts of conversations that turned into regular encounters Susan calls pub theology. These have continued during the pandemic. Meredith took to the streets of Worcester and headed for the Laundromat, where she listened to the stories of people doing their washing. This led to a storefront ministry involving folks who might never think about walking through the red doors of an Episcopal church. We will leave significant time for your questions and stories, thanks to my volunteer. And welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much. We've decided I'm going to begin. My name is Meredith Ward. I too am an Episcopal priest, and I'm the urban missioner for the Episcopal Diocese of Western Massachusetts. I was drawn to a very troubled neighborhood in the city of Worcester. I am a recovering alcoholic and addict, and unfortunately, one of my sons followed in my footsteps. And he wound up in the Main South neighborhood of Worcester, where a lot of folks who struggle with addiction and homelessness hang out. I decided that that was the place that I needed to be ministering. And I was able to talk with my bishop about this, and Doug Fisher helped arrange seed money through the Episcopal Church. Plan A, and there have been many plans, was that I was going to work out of a dying Episcopal church in that neighborhood, a church that had, 8 or 10 members. And the thought was that I would hospice that congregation and start a new one. Unfortunately, we discovered within about half an hour of my arrival that the place wasn't going to work because it had black mold and I have asthma. And so after a quick trip to the emergency room, we were on Plan B. Plan B, there was none. So I walked around the neighborhood of Worcester. I literally walking the neighborhood. It was winter time. I spent time in coffee shops and fast food places, but the best places I found were laundromats. They're warm, they're open 24 hours, and you get enough white noise from the washers and dryers that you can have private conversations in a public place, which is basically any pastoral care person's dream. There's no worry about, privacy, but there's also no worry about being alone with a stranger. And so I hung out in laundromats and got in touch with the folks who do Laundry Love. Laundry Love began, as many of you know, on the West Coast when a group of folks who were in Ventura, California, were talking to some of their homeless neighbors about what they needed. That's a radical thought to many people, that you might actually ask people what they need rather than simply deciding this is what we ought to do. And so what was said to the folks in California was, if our clothes smelled better, maybe people would treat us nicely. And so Laundry Love was born. We were able to be the Worcester branch of Laundry Love pretty easily. And actually the laundromat was where my celebration of new ministry happened. Standing in the middle of a laundromat, wearing alb and stole with my bishop in full regalia, kneeling on the floor of the laundromat to say, "This is my altar." And that was an extraordinary experience. Fortunately, I didn't have to walk the streets forever. The standing committee of the diocese had started referring to me as a street walker for Jesus, which, while accurate, was not exactly what I wanted to describe myself as in public. So our third iteration was we acquired a storefront that no one wanted to rent because it was in the middle of the epicenter of the opioid crisis in Worcester, and among other things, that had mushrooms growing out of the floor. We were able to get a grant to get the place renovated. We argued that social isolation was a public health risk, and we're able to get money from a public health organization as a result. In the storefront at various points, we've had ESL classes and 12-step groups and coffee and snacks, Narcan training, and a lot of laughter. In early COVID, we unfortunately had to close when the state of Massachusetts closed down, and we transitioned to what we now refer to as the ice cream truck phase of our ministry. We threw everything we could think of into the back of our cars and vans and drove around the neighborhood finding our folks. And when we stopped, people would gather and there would be, "Hey, who needs condoms? Who wants coffee? Who needs a snack?" And we were able to provide for those needs. We're now able to have limited opening in the storefront, and we're praying that we don't have to close down again this winter. I wanted not to just give you that overview, though, but to tell a couple of stories from each space. One of my favorite stories from the laundromat, one night a woman came in. She didn't realize it was Laundry Love. She just came in to do her laundry. She had her beautiful little girl with her. And when we told her that the laundry was free, that we had detergent for her, that we had pizza for dinner, and we had adults who wanted to read stories to her child, she was overwhelmed. She told us that she had just enough money to do her laundry, and she wasn't sure how she was going to feed her kid that night. And here we were saying, we've got laundry, we've got the money for the laundry, we've got food for your child. About 10 minutes after she'd loaded her clothes, she and her daughter left for a few minutes. Now, this is not normal behavior. Folks who don't have a lot of stuff don't leave the laundromat for fear that someone will grab their things. But she came back in a few minutes later with a container of juice boxes, 6 juice boxes. And she said, "I saw that you were running low. I wanted to help." Someone who had so little was offering herself to the community. She caught the idea that this wasn't just us doing for her, but us doing for each other and for the community as a whole. The second story of Laundry Love that always gets me is we were at one point, we're now doing it on Wednesday night, but at one night, at first we were doing it on Thursday. And one year it suddenly dawned on me that Maundy Thursday fell on a Thursday that year. And it was a Laundry Love night. We do it once a month. And because I'm a little slow on the uptake, I thought, well, maybe we could switch nights. And then I said to myself, "Meredith, you're a priest. You're going to cancel the principal act of loving service to our neighbors in order to go to church and talk about serving our neighbors." So we had Maundy Thursday at the laundromat. We washed feet. We had a woman who is a massage therapist come in and give foot massages to everyone who was there. We celebrated Eucharist with grape juice and pita on one of the folding tables. And we carried the elements all around the laundromat, serving everyone, including the laundromat owner, who's an observant Jew. And he said to me, "Your story is our story. I recognize those prayers." And so this act of love and service that I was just barely bright enough to recognize extended beyond this community and the laundromat to the wider world. But the most touching piece of it was as we were leaving that night, a woman came up to me. Now, Martha is one of those women who looks like she could be anywhere from 60 to 103. She has lived a very hard life, but she was living in a truck with her husband who has dementia. And Martha came up to me and said, "Thank you. Thank you for the foot massage. It's the first time in 5 years that I felt like someone was taking care of me." That was my Maundy Thursday. And I almost missed it because I was too busy trying to be normal church. At the storefront, we have all kinds of wonderful things happening. It's happy chaos is the way we describe it. There are definitely characters who come through. There are people who come in once or twice, and there are people who come regularly. And one of our regulars is a guy named Eric. Eric is, by his own admission, schizophrenic. He often, but not always, takes his drugs. Whether he's on or off his drugs, he will tell you that he is a ninja. He does definitely have some skills in martial arts. That's apparent. But Eric is an extraordinarily kind person who sees his job as taking care of other people. He will tell you that the reason why he's a ninja is that the streets are dangerous and someone has to watch out for other people. Eric, when we give people snacks, we have to place a limit on it. And so you can have so many snacks. You can choose which ones you want, but you take a maximum of 4. And Eric would take them, put them in his pocket, and give them to other people. And we knew that Eric needed to eat because he's always painfully thin, and we know that he gives away most of his snacks. So we made him the official snack tester. And so when we got something new, we would say, "Eric, we need your review." And he would say, "This is really tasty, but you have to have good teeth to eat it. It wouldn't be good for someone who didn't have good teeth." Or, "This is wonderful, but you should note that it has nuts because someone might be allergic." But there was one day when Eric was in and one of our volunteers had brought chocolate chip cookies. And my grandson, it was a school vacation, and my grandsons were there. And as 8 and 9-year-old boys will do, they each grabbed a couple of handsful. And I said to them, "Boys, you can have a few, but there are people here who don't get to eat as often as you do, and maybe you should put some back." And Eric looked at me and said, "They can be the tasters. They can have my share. I don't ever want them to know what it's like to be hungry." And so this is the guy who looks like Jesus when you know him, but if you don't, you would cross the street to get out of his way, especially if he's punching and kicking as he walks along. There's a wonderful young woman named Ashley who comes in regularly. Ashley is a street worker. She's a sex worker. That's how she supports herself. She is articulate and beautiful. But one day last summer, she came into us and she was obviously in great pain. Her pimp had thrown hot cooking oil on her because she hadn't brought in enough money. And so we had to try to get the t-shirt off her back and get her to emergency care. Because of her history with the police, we knew, and she knew, that if we called 911, she would be arrested for an outstanding warrant. And they would feel the need to process her through the system before her burns were taken care of. So we got her to a local community health center where we have a remarkable relationship with one of the docs. And he saw her and he took care of her burns, and he got her into rehab. And she came to see me about 2 weeks ago, carrying her newborn baby. Ashley is now living in another city. She has started going to school because she wants to be an LPN. And she is moving on towards a new life. That's the work of Walking Together, is helping people until they're ready to make the change in their life, whether it's a dramatic change or a small one. And now it's Susan's turn to tell stories. And afterwards, we will answer questions to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Meredith. Hello, everyone. Good to see so many faces on screen and the group of you there physically gathered. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So, a priest, a rabbi, and a Buddhist monk walk into a bar. The bartender looks at them and says, "What is this, a joke?" In COVID pandemic time, we might say a priest walks into a bar. Those were the days. Well, pre-pandemic, 7 years ago, this priest did walk into a bar, the newly opened Kingdom Tap Room here in St. Johnsbury. I went because this was where people were gathering. I went in search of community that was already formed, I suspected. And I went because this new pub had really good beer. I went because I wanted to minister among people, not people in church. And I went to see what God would show me. A fresh expression of church, which is what pub theology is. This fresh expression is beautiful and messy. And I would posit the argument that all fresh expressions are beautiful and messy. They are also always risky. So I walked into a bar wearing a clergy collar, sitting on a bar stool, drinking beer, and just, well, waiting. My thoughts that first night were, will the staff ask me to leave? What do people think? It's a small town. Do I have enough money to keep coming week after week? Who pays for my beer? And for how long? What about my bishop? Is it better to ask permission or to apologize later? Would it work? This ministry, is this what people need or are looking for? And is God here now? So in the pub, I did find answers. People were in community. God, good beer, all there. And on that very first night, believe it or not, I found Sharon. Well, actually, she found me. When I walked in and went up to the bar to order my drink, Sharon turned in her stool and she took one look at me and she said, "You're Anglican, aren't you? I know your sort." She had a heavy British accent. "You're here to convert people, aren't you? Stay away from me." I got my drink. I moved a couple stools down the bar. I sat down and sipped. And not but a few minutes later, Sharon began to talk to me. I slowly sipped my beer and listened. By the way, another question from that night: how quickly should a priest drink a beer in public? Sharon talked for over an hour. She cried eventually. She told me about her job, her upcoming retirement from this work, and her sense of worthlessness. She was really struggling with the question: was her career all for nothing? Was she nothing? She eventually wiped her eyes with a cocktail napkin, and she said she had not told anyone what she had just told me. She gathered her stuff and she said, "Thanks, Vika," and she left. I continued to sit on that bar stool every Wednesday night for about a year, waiting and listening. People were skeptical or suspicious at first, were friendly and open. Visitors who were on beer tours came and started talking to me. Neighbors sat next to me. Would this ministry work? A fresh expression of church is always risky. And in a fresh expression of church, relationship is everything. What grew in that year were relationships and connections, some only for that short while, a few minutes, an hour or two. Some grew over many months. There were two critical relationships that first year, one with the owners and one with the staff. The owners were this friendly group of local young professionals who were investing in the community of our town by opening this pub and making it available for everyone, including families with children. And then there were the staff, most of whom also were young, but not all. They welcomed strangers, and within an hour or so were calling people by name. They carefully would suggest that I move over to talk with so-and-so at the end of the bar who was having some trouble. Or later, move over and talk to that person, Susan, would you? He seems kind of lonely tonight. So these relationships with staff and owners made the next steps in this missional ministry possible for me, gathering people into this place, into a more intentional community, and with God more obvious in the mix or messiness. That was what I wanted to move into, and these relationships helped. And so began Pub Theology in St. Johnsbury, a weekly drop-in discussion group with whoever came and sat around the tables, a topic-focused conversation where folks could share what mattered in their lives. And it worked. People came and came again, and the group grew over months. Priests and ministers walked into the bar. Buddhist nuns came. Rabbinical students and rabbis came. They all walked into the bar. I actually had to ask them to leave. Awkward. We of the collars and credentials and leadership positions could not shut up. It was like seminary and temple and church when the professional faith leaders hold forth. The pub conversation was not for them. And it was not about attracting people from the pub to show up to worship services on Friday night or Saturday morning. I already knew that. I was convinced of that. I had to convince them of that. The pub conversation was about where God was already in relationship with people, where people were hoping and looking for God, where they were stuck or feeling lost, or where they were certain of God or questioning of God or wrestling with God. It was to some of us about following Jesus. And to other people, it was following a path of light and love, or about finding wholeness. And for others, it was about justice for common good. Relationship is beautiful and messy, and it is everything in a fresh expression. In a fresh expression, you have to deal a lot with the F word, failure. Pub theology, oh sure, sexy, successful, cool, kind of growing, exciting. It's a great topic for a conference presentation. But ask me too about the diner ministry. How about that house church that I planted? You want to know about Eventide and my best fail story, table gathering? All started up and all ended within a few months. All failed, and all of them were beautiful and messy. I'll tell you those stories another time, but for now, I'll tell you this. Failure in Fresh Expressions Ministries is to be expected. You should anticipate it, and in fact, you should embrace it. If not, you're not going to last. Failure does not mean that you are done, that you are finished. It does mean learning. It means revision. It does lead in new directions as well. To do these things, though, for me to have done these things, and for you, I offer to do these things, you have to do your best to leave out of the equation completely the shame and the blame and the guilt that we often dump into ourselves when we fail. And instead ask ourselves, what happened? What are the facts on the ground? Why did this happen? What was valuable? And what is the next experiment with God? We have to fail forward, as it's called in this ministry, using our failures in these experiments to reflect and learn and seek the continuing newness that God holds in front of us. Failure is a given. It is always messy, and it can be beautiful. Fresh expression ministry often means giving voice to the cry, and I did this a lot and still do. How long, O Lord, will this take? I had no idea when I sat on that bar stool for the first time what kind of timeline was going to play out. I had to believe this was God's timeline, not mine. And that was pretty darn annoying to me. It made it really hard to plan, and I am such a planner. But there were clues in all these expressions, the failures and the successful ones. Was there any spark? Was there any interest that led to passion, mine and other people's? Did people want to help eventually? Did they participate? Did they step into some ownership? Were there identifiable holy moments and sacred spaces and times that I really felt God was present? Were gifts emerging and being contributed, including money? Were my intuition and prayer and passions in sync with all of this? If some of these clues were not beginning to show up in 6 months, it was time to move on. Pub theology sparked and grew really steadily over the first 4 months. And it's still sparking and growing and folding in on itself 7 years later and reemerging in slightly different ways. I now try to stay out of the way. I try to point to what I see and experience. So, how long? Well, my gut, my intuition, some financial things and gifts, prayers, other people. It's not just me anymore. And it's beautiful and messy. Finally, fresh expressions like pub theology are us pitching a tent. They are not building a place. This is an incarnational ministry. It is not an attractional ministry. And it is definitely in a post-Christendom context. Pub theology is about a community that's already formed in my town and is being reformed all the time. It's about pitching a tent in the middle of that community, leaving the flaps wide open and seeing who shows up to gather for a night, for a few months, for 7 years. It's listening to what matters to the people, all people, not only the Episcopal Christians. In fact, a lot fewer Episcopal Christians and a whole lot more unaffiliated or no, not church ever folks, and Jews and Buddhists and Quakers, and even more spiritual folks who claim no single tradition or practice. I need to watch for when the tent stakes have to be pulled up and the canvas folded. It will happen. Community changes. Expressions of ministry in the wider community are not permanent fixtures. Pandemic time. I thought I would need to pull up the stakes and fold the tent in those first few days and couple of weeks of COVID pandemic. Surprise. The tent simply moved and was repitched. Pub Theology community is online, on Zoom, and the group who meets is being reformed each and every session. I never know who will Zoom in the same way I never knew who would show up in the bar. But now it's a wider community sitting down together in this online tent space. Oregon and Colorado and New Zealand and Maine and Quebec and Vermont. The table, now virtual, this table of pub theology is set each week, and I never know who's going to show up. Oh, and we are no longer pub theology. We are now public theology. The name public theology has now caught up to actually what we've been doing. We're gathering online for conversations to explore our stories and our beliefs outside of religious institutions. We engage questions so that we bring our faith into this public sphere for the sake of the common good. Those are actually the criteria, definitions, elements of public theology. So now that's our name. We make no assumptions. Bring your beliefs, your faith, or your practice if you have them. Maybe your unbelief, and definitely your doubts and your questions. So public theology is a movable tent, not a permanent place.
So I'm sure there are questions. We will not share our diagnoses with you, although I'm sure you wonder what kind of crazy it takes to do this. But are there other questions which we can attempt to answer or further muddle for you?
Yeah, this is Helen from St. Mary's, and I have a question for both of you. Oh, that better. When you started your ministries, wherever you were sitting, did people come and ask you, why are you doing this? Or, you know, what's your purpose? And why are you here?
Go ahead, Meredith.
What we were doing at first was walking around a very troubled neighborhood in an extremely cold winter, asking people if they needed socks or hats. We were offering a free gift to the neighborhood. And so cold people don't often question why you're giving them a hat when their ears are in danger of frostbite. We did our best to always be responding to what the community needed rather than waiting to see if people would come visit us.
Thanks, Helen, for your question. For me, people always ask that because it was such an unusual thing to see me wearing these clothes in a bar, or people had no idea that these clothes are a symbol, and had no idea I was a priest, but would just start talking with me. When people would ask me, why are you here? Or Sharon pointing her finger at me, which she's not the only person who's done that. You're here to recruit, aren't you? So if you are into evangelism, prepare yourselves. That question usually I would say in the bar, I'm here to meet people and to drink beer. And some nights I would drink seltzer or drink tea, and I would just say, I'm here to meet people. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes people later would ask me again, why are you really here? And what's going on? Or what is this thing, pub theology? We had a big banner we made with our logo on it, and we put it up on the wall in the bar. They had a trivia night banner for Tuesdays, and they had a pub theology banner for Wednesdays. So people would say, what is that? What's going on? What are you doing? So sometimes I could then talk really specifically about what the activity was, what the ministry was, what the purpose was.
Are there other questions?
I have a question. Am I
Yes,
Hey, Dick, go ahead.
Dick Bauer from Bennington. I've always thought of evangelism as bringing God, the people to God, as opposed to bringing God to the people, which is what you're doing, Susan. And I'm wondering, you've been in St. Johnsbury for a while. When did all this start in your ministry there? What prompted you to begin all this to begin with?
So I've been living in St. Johnsbury for 20 years. I've been ordained for 7. And it was the very Wednesday after I was ordained a transitional deacon that I went to the bar.
Really?
So I've been doing this my whole time as an ordained person in my community. But people knew me in the community for 13 years before that. So when I started suddenly showing up in the brand new bar and wearing a rather odd looking outfit, some of those community folks who had known me before were a bit puzzled. So I had that to deal with. I would say to your statement about God to the people, God's already there with everybody. God's already in that bar. God's already online on Zoom. God is here with us. I'm not, as an evangelist, bringing God to somebody. I don't think that is true in my experience, and it's not true for what I believe. I am often the person who is helping connect people. I am often the person who is holding up and making some kind of safe place for folks who are struggling with that relationship with God, or are struggling and don't even know what that really is about or what that means, and a whole lot of other things that I could go into at another time. But it's not for me about bringing God somewhere. It's about seeing where God already is and how. And I ain't the only one, Dick. Oh my gosh, there were so many other people in that bar where I felt God was being active in their lives, that some days I just thought, I'm just going to sit here quietly and keep sipping my beer and let them show me, teach me, let them evangelize me.
Mary, you had a question.
Yeah, a practical matter, Susan. How did you move from the tent to Zoom? It's like people on the tent aren't going to have internet.
Yeah, so the tent is actually still here, Mary. It's just on Zoom. The tent is my metaphor for this ministry, one of them. So it took me, well, because I was already doing other things in my life online, and I was doing like web conferences, and I would work online a lot. I didn't know Zoom itself as the platform, but I knew other kinds of experiences like this. And pretty quickly, within church leadership circles, there were a lot of folks hopping on electronics. Some folks, some denominations never skipped a beat. Some of us still had to learn new things pretty darn quickly. So those first couple of weeks here in Vermont, when we had the lockdown for those 3 weeks, Myself, clergy leaders I'm in contact with, and other faith leaders, we were all sort of learning, like, what the heck are we going to do? How are we going to do it? What does it mean? How much does it cost? Blah, 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 blah. And sharing that information with each other. So it was actually not as difficult or a challenge for me, because of the other work experience I had, to make a space and get an account on Zoom and start making it happen. I posted notices on our Front Porch Forum, which is an electronic bulletin board service. It's sort of US wide, but can be localized. I let people know that we were meeting on Zoom and on our Facebook page. And then I just emailed or called or Zoomed, messaged specific people from the sort of core group to tell them. And people just started coming.
That's
And
what I
people
wondered, how
started-
you got the people out on the street, how you got them into a place where they could access Zoom.
So out on the street now pretty much means the electronic communications. So it's Front Porch Forum and Facebook primarily. I don't tweet, I don't TikTok, I don't do those things. Some of you might, but a lot of the people up here that I'm working among don't. So it seems so far a good match, and that's how I do it.
Thank you.
Linda.
So hi, I'm wondering, both of you, do you have disciples? Are there people who get started doing this with you and then branch out and start doing this or similar things themselves?
I have been blessed with folks who are doing this. Some people through Laundry Love, some people do through the storefront, some people through the 12-step communities. One of my first collaborators was a deacon in Western Mass who wound up moving to Florida because of her work, and has started a Laundry Love in her community in Florida. By the way, if you're interested, go to laundrylove.org. They have remarkable mentoring going on, both online and in person. And there are any number of us who are willing to travel to help groups walk through their first couple of nights. One of my favorite stories, though, of discipleship or mentorship, there is a woman named Carrie who started coming to the storefront when she first came to Worcester. She had come to be part of a recovery program. Carrie did some volunteering at the center, eventually got herself a job at a local hospital where she works second shift. And when we were distributing food and socks and other things from our cars during the worst of COVID last winter, she would go out on her way home from work. She had experienced homelessness herself, knew where people were likely to congregate, and would drive to meet the communities and distribute food and clothing and toiletry supplies. And she always said, "This is from Walking Together. This is from the Episcopal Church. They loved me when I could not love myself, and they will do that for you too." So those are two examples of the way this has grown beyond what I do.
I've had many people talk with me, faith leaders from different denominations and traditions. I've had lay leaders as well. I'm not aware of any specific ones that have taken this and homegrown it wherever their local is. I just this past Wednesday had a colleague from Maine Zoom in to check it out, visit, asks me a bunch of questions later and says she's interested in starting it up. I often don't have the time to follow up myself with some of these folks. I look for them on Facebook from time to time to see what's grown up. But I don't have any stories like Meredith does. And I want to just raise up what Meredith has said. I think if those opportunities come my way, I would certainly help, resource, give you all, any of you all, whatever other stories or help I could.
Meredith,
Yes.
I did have one question. Just occurred to me. Susan talked about how she got the go-ahead from her, or the blessing, I guess, of the pub she was working in. How did you do that with the laundromat?
We have a wonderful working relationship with the laundromat. I had been hanging out there being this strange woman who would come in one afternoon a week with coloring books for kids and help moms fold clothes.
Mhm.
And I got to know the manager, and I talked to her, and she thought it was a great idea. The owner thought it was an even better idea because we were willing to do it on the quietest night of the week.
Mhm.
You know, in fact, the owner, who, as I may have said, is an observant Jew, tithes to Walking Together and to Laundry Love as part of his practice. And so I joke that he actually pays for the night, even though it's sponsored by the Episcopal Church.
Wow, that's great. And the walking, what was it was walking?
Walking Together is the
Together.
name of the storefront.
Is the storefront name? Okay, thanks.
And Laundry Love is a national organization.
Yeah, and you said they have a website.
Yeah, they have a website, and they have wonderful things. There are also laundromat owners and operators who are willing to talk to their counterpart about how Laundry Love has worked. If you have a laundromat owner who is a little reluctant but not totally opposed,
Mhm.
for instance, they could call Jared, our laundromat owner, who will say, do it, it's wonderful, it's fun, it brings in the community, you know, all that. So
Mhm. Neat.
yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
This isn't a question. I'm Titus from Enosburg, Jay Peak area. I just want to say, God bless you. These have been wonderful and inspirational stories, and I think we have all been very edified and blessed by what you shared.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Titus. Thank you all very, very much.
And a very big thank you to you both for presenting and coming and sharing your experience, strength, and hope.
You all have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
You too.